Plaquemines Parish Council Borough Pit Advisory Committee on April the 8th, 2021 at 1 p.m. is now called to order. We'll have roll call.
Right here.
Mr. John?
Not on. My computer's not on.
Right here.
Can you do a verbal?
Oh, I don't know if I'm sitting this week. Don't make a slide at all.
I'm not making a comment.
You make it up.
Let the record reflects that 6 members are present and Jacques Touzat is absent.
The attorney.
We'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance led by Mr. Bartholomew.
Yeah, that's all right. Pledge allegiance to
To the flag
States.
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Number 2, discussion of the Uniform Local Sales Tax Code.
Come in, please. Mr. Roussel?
Yes, thank you, committee members, for attending today. We're fortunate today to have Mr. Pat Amity with us today, who has represented the local government in tax issues in the past and been very successful in making sure that the parish's interest is represented in different cases. And I've asked him to come today to be able to give us basically an overview of how and when we deal with borough pits on sales tax issues. And so without belaboring the point, I'd like Mr. Amity maybe to introduce himself a little bit and give a little history of his background, and then open up the floor for him to make a presentation, and then we'll have some questions.
Sure. Thank you, members of the committee, for having me here, Mr. President, Chairman. I'm Pat Amity. I collect your sales tax, or am the attorney that enforces the collection of your sales tax and defends refund claims and so forth on your behalf. I think I was probably hired right around the time that Mr. Cormier Sr. Became president of the parish. At the time, I had met one of your staff attorneys who was doing the sales tax work, and I can't remember his name. He's an older gentleman with kind of reddish hair, lived in Slidell at the time.
L.V. Cooley?
Cooley, yeah, LV, thank you. And so, you know, we actually had a case in common, and he asked me if, you know, I could assist them on that, and I did, and one thing led to another, and before I knew it, I was doing your sales tax collection. I do sales tax collection for Lafourche Parish, St. John Parish. I work for St. Charles, don't work exclusively for them. They have other attorneys that they hire, West Baton Rouge, and a number of other parishes where I've done individual work. I am familiar with the borough pit issues because we had them in St. Charles, we had them here obviously in Plaquemines, but I did try cases for St. John that actually took to the Board of Tax Appeals, tried, and went to the Court of Appeals. So I kind of feel like I can speak with a little bit of intelligence on that issue and answer whatever questions you might have. Most of the borough pit litigation took place in around 2015, 2014, in that time frame. And I'm going by memory here. We were seeing there was audits of borough pits that were happening in all different parishes where they appeared, and of course this was subsequent to all the levy work that was being done by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. When we looked at invoices, and I'm not just talking about Plaquemines Parish, but in other parishes, we were seeing sales taxes that were being collected on the value of the dirt. And most of the companies were their invoice would look like this. It would be $1.50 for a cubic yard of dirt times however many yards were being purchased. Then there was a separate charge for loading and processing that was itemized, and the net effect was that the cubic yards of dirt, or a yard of dirt, was costing around $7.50. Now, what was also important, I guess, for you guys to know is that the pits were core certified pits, and you may know this already, and I might be just preaching to the choir here, but the federal government, when they are building levees, only use certain materials. And of course, the clay has to have a certain mineral content. It can only have a small amount of organic content. So many enterprising companies located clay pits or clay deposits in different parishes. And so they would get them pre-certified by the Corps of Engineers, meaning that if you bought your dirt or your clay from this pit, it was already pre-certified. You could use it on a federal project. Now, it was important for you as a local government that, you know, the Corps would certify the levee that they were building, because once built, your federal flood rate would go down if you were behind a federally certified levee. I also coincidentally represent the North Lafourche Levee District, which is a levee district in obviously Lafourche Parish. They have the section above the intercoastal down in Lafourche. And they can't afford to build with clay. It's just cost prohibitive, because they can you know, build the levee at the 40 arpent line and just borrow out of the 40 arpent canal, or, you know, extend it or widen it. And so that's primarily how the local levee districts are able to build. But of course, you know, the federal government's going to, you know, demand that it be clay. So obviously the clay pits, nobody was really buying from a core certified clay pit unless they had a federal contract. There was a case, I guess it was in 2015, got to the Court of Appeal. It was Odebrecht versus State of Louisiana. Odebrecht was a federal contractor that had a federal core levee contract. And I've looked at dozens of federal contracts, or U.S. Army Corps of Engineer contracts for levee construction, and they all have the same language, so they're virtually identical. But there's a provision in the contract that says that the Corps or the federal government takes title to any of the materials that are purchased at the time of purchase pursuant to the contract provisions. Now, we know that that was primarily an asset protection clause, meaning that the reason that was in there is that, let's say Odebrecht goes belly up, the federal government steps in and says, we own this clay already. It's not an Odebrecht asset. And in a bankruptcy proceeding, obviously they would have a, you know, that asset wouldn't go into the corpus of the estate of the bankruptee. So, you know, that argument was actually made by the state in the Odebrecht case. And what we found out, and what the court did in that case, is they said that, well, let me take a step back. There is a statutory exclusion under Louisiana sales tax law. And the citation, I know it by heart for as many times as I've cited it. It's Title 47, Section 301, Subpart 10, Subpart G. And the way it reads is something like this. It says a sale at retail does not include sales for resale to the federal government prior to incorporation in the finished product. So the attorneys for Odebrecht, very good attorneys, I know them very well, Bob Angelico and Cheryl Cornig from Lisco Lewis, representing Odebrecht, came up with this brilliant argument. And they said, well, you know, we've got this contract provision that shows title transfer, and it's in every core contract. And we have this 30110G exclusion that says if it's resold to the federal government prior to incorporation, then it is an excluded sale. It is not a sale at retail, and therefore tax is not due. So we were all waiting on, a decision. We were hoping the state would win. As it turns out, they did not. And the Odebrecht decision was decided in favor of the contractor, and that was an excluded sale. So the net effect of that is that we had a number of audits that were ongoing in Plaquemine and in other parishes, and we had to change gears, literally had to change gears. There were use tax issues, and a use tax is like if you bring a piece of equipment into Plaquemine and you use it in Plaquemine, it is subject to a use tax. Now, you get a credit if you pay tax somewhere else on it, but if you didn't, then, or you can't account for it, then we can assess a use tax on the fair market value of the equipment at the time it's brought into the parish and put in use. So a lot of the audits that you saw early on in Plaquemine, we were, the auditors were picking up this differential because they saw $1.50 charged, and then, there was no tax on the loading and processing, which we argued. Well, I can tell you, I'll get to that, but that was my argument in the St. John case that I actually did win. But loading and processing is part of the cost price. In other words, it's the aggregate cost of the clay when title or possession is transferred to the contractor. And you can't like break down an invoice and say, we cut the tree down and that was 50 cents, and then we milled it and that was another charge, and then we transported it to the place where we pressure treated it, and then you can't do that. What you pay tax on is the aggregate of all of those costs. Okay, so where we were coming from in Plaquemine, St. Charles, St. John, is we were picking up this $5.50, and we were seeing this as part of the cost price. As it turns out, the whole transaction was non-taxable because it wasn't subject to tax. We luckily settled some cases where they couldn't prove that they actually sold to the Corps of Engineers. We had a few cases. I'll tell you, I'll just give you an example. A St. John case was against a company called Willow Bend Ventures, and they operate a big dirt pit in St. John. Over the course of 3 years, 2010, 11, and 12, they sold about $18 million worth of dirt. St. John is in the middle of an audit, and Willow Bend's collecting and not even filing with St. John. And then we're seeing this differential, this $5.50 that's not being collected, where Willow Bend is claiming that this is a service and not part of the cost price. So we try the case, but we changed gears because we're looking at their invoicing, and they're selling to people that don't have core contracts, and their invoices don't show a core job. So we go to court and we say, Judge, we understand 30110G, and that's not what this case is all about. We're looking at the specific transactions, and we think there were sales to either subcontractors or to maybe core contractors, but there's no evidence that the dirt was actually used or bought by the Corps of Engineers. I think that if different attorneys were handling that case, if Bob Angelico and Cheryl Kornig were handling the case, for example, St. John wouldn't have gotten the result that they got because the Willow Bend didn't call any of the contractors to testify. They just put their in-house people on the stand, and all these folks were from Mississippi. And so, they just didn't prove that, and they had the burden of proof to prove that these were sales to contractors or subcontractors that were doing work for a core project. I suspect that they were, because this was one of those pits that was certified, and I think it was more error on the part of their counsel, frankly. And I know that this wound up in bankruptcy, and I fought that case for about 3 years before we finally got paid on behalf of St. John. So the question always comes back, well, should we be auditing these companies, and is there a future in sales tax collection? I will simply tell you that there are a lot of businesses that you would like to audit in St. John, in Plaquemine and in other parishes, but you have limited resources, right? I mean, you can't audit every single business, so you want to spend your money wisely. And I'm asked the question, is this a wise use of your money? And, in St. John, we haven't audited another dirt pit. In St. Charles, we haven't audited another dirt pit. There may be some incidental transactions, but if the dirt pit is a federally certified clay pit, in all likelihood, the clay that is being sold is going to end up in a federal project, or it's going to end up in a state project that is looking for core certification, or it's going to be a major public works. It's not going to be a contractor buying some dirt to fill up a lot to build a house. He's not going to use clay. He's just going to go buy the dirt where he can find it at $1.50 a cubic yard or $2 a cubic yard. So we know now, and everybody in the industry now knows how to protect themselves. Like if you're a dirt pit, what you are likely going to do is have a better accounting method than Willabend had, and you're going to document that every yard that you sell is to a contractor that has either a federal contract or a subcontractor of a contractor that has a federal contract. And you're going to keep records of all that stuff. And you're going to itemize. As I pointed out in the St. John case, there was no, you look at an invoice, it usually has FOB information, or it has job number or something like that. The Corps of Engineers has a very specific identifier, like in the Laplace area, all of the work was on Lake Pontchartrain and vicinity or the airport, and they'd have a code, LPV dash blah, 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 and a number, Lake Pontchartrain and vicinity. So the court at the Board of Tax Appeals in the St. John case said, look, if it's got that kind of information on the invoice, then I believe that was a purchase that was related to a core contract. And so, Amity, you lose on that invoice. The only thing I actually collected on that was like they did collect on some of those, Willabend did, and didn't remit, so I got like tax on $1.50, but I didn't get it on the residual. There were some invoices where there was no information and there wasn't a contractor that had a core contract, and so I did succeed on that, but that was just poor record keeping from a company that was was working out of a contractor out of Mississippi. So so when your tax office asked me, is it a good idea or a bad idea to audit a dirt pit at this point, that's really kind of a subjective determination. You got to spend your money wisely. Do I think there's a lot of sales tax due you all in these dirt pits? Not if they're operating properly. Not if they're keeping good records. My answer to you would be it's not really a sales tax opportunity for you, and you may not wish to audit them because it's not likely going to happen. You can, you can double check and maybe look at one every 4 or 5 years or something like that, but it's just not a situation I'm advising that you do. If you had an unlimited budget for audits, then sure, why not? But it's not. You have bigger fish, I guess, in my respectful opinion. But that's kind of the way it works. So, and from the audit perspective, I know you asked me about the Uniform Local Sales Tax Code. It is a body of law that was established in 2003. It provides for a process where you audit a company, you come up with a proposed assessment. There's a hearing that the taxpayer or vendor is entitled to with your collector. Then we usually have that hearing right over there in your sales tax office. And then we talk about it, the collector, myself, the auditors, and we may adjust it based on information that the taxpayer provides us. At that point, the collector will issue a redetermination and in many cases an assessment. At that point, the assessment has to be appealed to the Board of Tax Appeals, which is where all these cases wind up, whether it be Plaquemine or, well, literally any parish in the state, which is right in Baton Rouge on First Street. I'm sorry, 4th Street and North. And then, we try it and we determine taxability. But what I'm telling you is that there is, and the law is pretty much well settled after the Odebrecht case as to taxability of clay being purchased for a federal contract. So I know that was an issue.
You have any more questions, Mr. Roussel?
Open the floor for any members, and then
Okay.
I'll make a
Mr. Valley?
Thank you for your report. A little shocking, but it's a little different, but it is the facts. It's the law. It raises another question. When I first started looking at this, I saw some of the pit operators paying sales tax and others not, so I raised the question. Now my question goes back to, what happens to these people that have been paying tax on all this core certified dirt? Are they entitled to a refund?
Could be. It depends. I mean, if the vendor is collecting it, he has an obligation to remit it to us. So the first inquiry is, are you collecting it and remitting it? In one of the cases, the St. John case, they had collected about $150,000 over the course of 3 years and hadn't even filed a return. So that was kind of like an absolute starting point, but we knew we were going to get a judgment there. If they're collecting and not remitting, the answer is they need to remit it. Then the taxpayer is the contractor. The contractor would have to file for a refund and can. And that's, we get refund claims quite frequently when there has been a mispayment of taxes. So to answer your question, yes,
The little bit that I looked into, basically the pit operators just pass the cost along to the Corps, raise the price to the Corps, but you're telling me they're not allowed to do that, but in theory.
well, the refund isn't the pit would be considered the dealer, right? They're not paying the tax. They're just collecting it on behalf of the parish. So it never actually belongs to them. The way that sales tax works is that the law says the dealer is your representative and collects it and holds it in trust. So it's not like income tax.
They remit to the parish or to the state,
Exactly.
quarterly or semi-annually, whatever.
Well, monthly, ordinarily, if they're,
Large enough.
yeah, well, they're required to file monthly unless your sales tax office gives them a variance and allows them to file less frequently. But the point I'm making is that if they collect $1 in sales tax, they're supposed to remit it because it's not their money. It never is their money. Then it becomes an issue between Plaquemine and the taxpayer, who in this case would be the contractor, because under Louisiana law, the contractor is considered to be the taxpayer for purposes of these types of transactions. Does that my answer?
It still leaves a little gap in there because in theory, the pit owner is not necessarily the operator
Well,
and not necessarily the contractor that's doing the work.
right. Most of these situations are, particularly in Plaquemine, you had like third parties coming in and entering into a contract with the landowner for the minerals or for the right to excavate the clay. And so, the owner isn't part of the transaction at all, in at least in some of the ones that I've seen here in this parish. And so the operator is the dealer, for purposes of the sale. Not the landowner, but the operator who has the license or the agreement to mine the clay.
On a secondary opinion, I've heard that the clay is considered a mineral and is exempt as well under state law. Is that?
No,
Ring a
it's
bell?
not exempt. I mean, if you sold it to a
Like
third party,
Oil and gas. I mean, the oil's exempt.
well, that's a different oil and gas. That's yeah. I mean, there's a different set of laws. There's a constitutional prohibition from sales tax on petroleum and gas and things. So we don't charge tax at the pump. That's a different excise tax that's permitted by law. But insofar as clay is concerned, that's just a building material.
It's not considered a mineral.
Well, the contracts call it a mineral, but it's not, and it is considered, in other words, if you were a contractor and you didn't have a federal exclusion that you could apply, then the tax would be due on the sale, because that would be considered tangible personal property.
For all practical purposes, I'm making an assumption, most of the dirt was designed, and when the ordinance was put together, was to build levees in Plaquemines Parish by the Corps for levee protection. So I would assume most of this dirt that's been dug is protected under that exemption you're talking about.
Yes. Yeah, I would probably agree with that. We do have, well, yeah, I would agree with
It's simple enough for you to look at and have the contractors or the pit operators submit their invoices or the forms of their invoices they do using now to whether or not you want to audit them as a beginning point.
Well, that would be an audit. In other words, once you start requesting information, you don't kind of audit them. You either audit them or you don't. And because you got to send. I mean, there's a process for doing that. We have to send them a notice of examination. We have to give them a time frame. We got to tell them what we're going to do. We got to tell. I mean, in fairness to them, we can't just kind of nibble at it. We got to let them know.
And your recommendation to the administration is not to pursue it?
Today, yes.
Okay, that's all my questions.
Mr. Wilcox.
Mr. Amity, Will Wilcox, by the way.
Yes, sir. Same here.
Are you familiar with the Edgard Construction Materials Project in
No,
St.
sir.
John?
I am not. I haven't been engaged to. I mean, if there's not a sales tax issue involving it, I wouldn't be.
Well, I don't know if there's an issue. I'm reading an article I'd like to maybe address a little bit. It says, it's a licensed borrow pit that has supplied clay to U.S. Army Corps of Engineer levee projects since 2009, which provides critical sales tax revenues to St. John the Baptist Parish.
Okay.
So
How is that possible?
how is that possible after what you just told me?
I would say, I would question the source of the information, to be honest with you. I mean, I'll be happy to send you copies of these different cases. The state handled the Odebrecht case, and, the local attorneys, the guys that do this on behalf of local government, there's a handful of us that do this on a regular basis. Is myself, Rusty Stutes out of Lake Charles, Richard Barham out of North Louisiana, Drew Talbot out of Baton Rouge. Drew probably represents 40 different parishes. And we stay in communication. We have a lot of cases together. Drew and his partner, Bob Rayner, who has since passed away, Drew kind of inherited that practice, took on Odebrecht for the locals, and also a company by the name of Cajun Contractors that was a major levee builder. And basically the Odebrecht decision, that was the state decision, was affirmed in both of those cases. So if it's a sale for resale to the federal government under the federal contract that has what now we call the Odebrecht language, that's how specific it is. We know that we're not going to collect on that.
On a follow-up, I'm reading an audit that was performed in Plaquemines Parish at some point, and it mentions Louisiana Board of Tax Appeals and under Louisiana Revised Statute 47-339-49,
Okay.
in which this audit does tell us that there is tax that was voluntarily collected. There was tax collected from it after I guess as a result of the examination, and then there was pending monies to be collected post-audit, I guess. And it cites the Louisiana Board of Tax Appeals and the Louisiana Revised Statute. Is that statute been superseded by this Odebrecht that you know of, or are you familiar with this statute?
I am certainly familiar with 337.49, yeah. And I am certainly familiar with the Odebrecht case. But I don't, what is the date on that and what is the case? I'm just curious. And the Board of Tax Appeals as well.
Doesn't cite a case. It cites the Louisiana Board of Tax Appeals. I'll be glad to show it to you. I'm
Sure.
generally trying to figure out
Right. Right, no, we actually do have one remaining case that made its way to the Board of Tax Appeals that has not yet been resolved. So I would be hesitant to discuss that with you. I certainly wouldn't want to discuss it publicly. But, you know, that is a case that's ongoing right now, and there are a few issues left to be resolved in the case. So, but that you know, there was several cases that went to the Board of Tax Appeals from the parish of Plaquemines. I can tell you at least 2 of them we took to judgment. There were other ones that we were able to resolve. Once we got some clarity after Odebrecht, then we had to kind of change gears, and we were looking at different issues. A couple of companies just didn't even respond to us. There was a company called Advanced Clay that had been assessed for over $300,000. They were owned by a group out of California that came to Louisiana, set up an LLC, didn't have any assets in Louisiana. The assessment was pretty much based upon their gross sales, which, you know, they didn't even respond to the assessment. So it went final, and we took a default, and we got a judgment against them, but it has resulted in being an uncollectible debt or uncollectible judgment. There was another company, Stella Plantation Excavators, that was doing work here. And the same thing happened. They pretty much ignored the notice of assessment. We went to court, got a judgment against them. I tried to collect it from 2 of the principals, the two of the members of the LLC. Both guys' last name was Lovelace, and they lived in Mississippi. I sued them individually, but what they collected, they remitted. They were collecting the $1.50 tax on $1.50. They didn't collect it on the $5.50, and that was really the basis of the assessment against them. And the law in Louisiana says, as to members of an LLC or officers of a corporation, you can't go against them personally unless they collected and failed to remit. So we tried, and so we did get a couple of judgments out there that we didn't collect, and we did resolve some of the other ones that we made or that apparently had been assessed, with 1 remaining.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Roussel?
Yes, so to come around and try to sum this up a little bit, so sales to other than those at the federal level source or the state level, included the state level, are taxable.
Yes, sir.
So if it's a state levy, what about a local levy? If, for instance, like we spent in excess of $20-something million on an East Bank levy, and the contractor, built the levy for us.
Yes, sir.
So as a local government, we are exempted from collecting sales tax from ourselves.
Yes, sir.
So that would not apply.
That's correct. And you know, a lot of which you probably have seen this, where you've issued basically an agency agreement from the government to the contractor and to the subcontractors, and it'll be a notarized thing where you basically says you purchase on behalf of the federal government so that you maintain your tax exempt status on the transaction. If you look at most of in fact, I would say nowadays every single solicitation or advertisement for bid, and you look at the general conditions of those for public works, for political subdivisions in the state, there's a provision in it that says, bid this, all materials and supplies shall be tax exempt. So you're telling the contractor on the front end, you've got to bid this as if it's going to be an exempt sale, and then we'll give you the certificates after the fact. I see that quite a bit with North Lafourche Levy District, and I represent Lafourche Parish School Board as their general counsel, and that's constantly the drill when they're building a new school, for example. All the materials that are purchased for the construction of the school are going to be exempt, but the contractor's got to do his thing and get the agency agreement that's a state form that's accepted pretty much by every every sales tax agency in the state. So if you were going to, let's just say, for example, your sales tax auditor or collector audited the contractor who was doing a $20 million levy project for the parish, the first thing they would want to see is that, that agency agreement, which I'm sure they have, because they know it's, it'd cost them a lot of money if they didn't have it. And I'm sure they could, they'd get it from you eventually. So yeah, I mean, the point being, local government's exempt, state's exempt. For levy purposes, you'll see CPRA involved in a lot of projects now. They usually are going to have a cooperative endeavor agreement with the local agency, meaning that they want a pass-through agency that's going to manage the project. This will be, like a levy district, or maybe the parish if you all don't have a levy district. And so they'll get, like Go Mesa funds are now starting to flow. They'll have access to Go Mesa funds that then will be given to the local agency, provided they, get all the land rights, manage the project, do the engineering, all subject to CPRA's oversight. Again, all tax-free. All purchases not subject to sales tax, because you're dealing with basically public entities.
And so to move on and to make this crystal clear, because these are the questions that come up to us all the time. A pit owner selling to a contractor for the purpose other than an exempt federal, state, or local levy would pay sales tax on those items.
Would collect and remit to you. In other words, they would collect it from the contractor. The pit would collect it from the contractor and would remit it to your sales tax office. Yes, sir.
So no matter who owns the pit, if it goes through 3 different hands, it's still tax exempt if the end user is the state, local, or federal.
Yes, sir.
So, I mean, that's where the confusion comes in. So, well, somebody owns this pit, they're selling to this contractor, and they're trying to avoid the sales tax because they're passing it through 2 or 3 hands. But at the end of the day, it goes on a federal levy, so
right.
Each one of those are exempt.
Yeah, that was an issue that we addressed in the St. John versus Willabend case, and the one of the arguments that Willabend was making is that some of these entities that didn't have core contracts were subcontractors to contractors. And what the court said was that, well, that would have been, we would have, because it's an exclusion, we would read it most favorably to the taxpayer. And if you had provided evidence that this was a subcontract for a contractor who had a core contract, we would have determined that it was a non-taxable transaction. But since you didn't call any witnesses and you didn't call anybody from, XYZ company, then we don't know, meaning that the court didn't know where the dirt went after it left the Willabend pit. So the answer to your question is, yeah, in a federal contract, it looks like what the courts are going to do is they're going to allow any party in the chain, if it ultimately is put into a federal levy. The answer, yes.
Okay. So I don't really have too many, other questions on this item. And as far as going out and auditing the pits, it's a good idea to check them every 5 years or so. And it's been discussed by the parish administration, legal department, and a couple of us on the audit committee that if we decide that we want to take a look at borough pit operations in the parish, it might be a better use of resources to use the internal auditor to take a look at them.
Sure.
Knowing that, the rewards may be very slim, if any.
Sure.
But it'll be more of a check.
Yes, sir.
So that's something that the committee can consider and look at, and if that request comes, the audit committee can consider that. But other than the exemptions that we have here, we do know of one pit operator who did sell materials to an outside of the parish entity, or we don't know. I don't know personally exactly whether it was a state, federal, or local project, but that's something that probably should be looked at to see if there was sales tax due on those sales. And I don't know the contract. I just know they went out of the parish.
Right.
And so,
There are, and I don't mean to complicate this, because the point of sale is going to be important to you, where the title of possession passes. If the contractor sends his, or he provides for the transportation, if he picks it up at the pit, then the tax would be due here. If the pit is delivering it to a site in another parish where title and possession passes, in another parish, that's where the tax would be due. That's just the law in Louisiana. Where the sale occurs is where the tax is due. So it's also, it seems complicated. Once, I guess, you get involved in this stuff, it all seems pretty cut and dried. But, we are also looking at, when you audit, you're not just looking at a sale taking place. You want to know where the sale takes place. And if there is a FOB St. John or FOB Jefferson, freight on board, which means who has risk of loss up until the time it transfers, that would mean that FOB Jefferson means that the sale, title, and possession passes in Jefferson Parish, and the tax is technically due there, even though it was dug in Plaquemines Parish. So
that's another reason to look at what our ordinance really says.
yes, sir.
Well, I don't have any questions, but I see there's some other people that
Mr.
might have
Wilcox?
Quickly, I just wanted to follow, when you do purchase material for a federal job, you have to have a federal ID number, correct?
What we have seen is that there will be a job number. Let's just, I know we're talking about levies, so let's talk about the Corps of Engineers. Everything, when they solicited bids and they sent out all of these different reaches for contract, they gave numbers to every single project. So what the court has told us is that if the invoice references the core contract, the reach, that would have been sufficient for their purpose. I actually had one in St. John where I don't remember the contractor, but the job was Bell Chase. So they were buying dirt in St. John, bringing it to Bell Chase to use on a project. What the court said, that's not specific enough. We need, and we're not going to accept that because it could be a non-public contract in Bell Chase. And I actually got the sales tax on that particular invoice. So it's got to be more than, it's got to be specific that, the court can tie the project to the invoice. But if they do that, if it is on there, that would have been enough for the Board of Tax Appeals judge. And remember, I tried this case at the BTA before Judge Cole. He would be the same judge that would handle an appeal of a Plaquemines case, because they all funnel to one court now.
So in other words, if you, as part of a routine audit, one thing you would look for is that they're attributed it either, anytime this dirt is being purchased, it should be being done under either a federal ID number or, in this case, a job number or a reach number.
It would be, that would be the initial inquiry.
Otherwise, as the seller, I would have to collect taxes.
You probably should at that point. But, again, if you didn't, because, the contractor said, look, man, I got this federal contract and blah, 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 this is exempt, and there's no tax collected, the court will literally allow them to call the contractor at trial to say, look, I only bought dirt from this site in Plaquemines because I had this federal job. I didn't have any other business in Plaquemines. I wasn't going to buy dirt in Plaquemines to transport it to, across, because transportation cost on this kind of stuff is a primary concern. In other words, you want to buy it, you guys know that, you want to buy the dirt as close to the project as you can and minimize the impact of the transportation charges, because buying the dirt's one thing, but transporting it's another. From my experience with a levee district in Lafourche.
Mr. Donald Vallon?
Two things. One, Mr. Roussel mentioned about one of the other entities selling dirt outside of the parish. And there was a court agreement settling the dispute of that, allowing him to do it and charging additional fees per ton on that. No one was discussing sales tax to that, but to avoid having to refill the pits was the terms and conditions of that. However, it was my understanding that, from reading the files, that dirt went to another parish for a federal levy project. So that in itself would be exempt by the use of that dirt. My earlier comment to you about refunding, the payee who paid the sales tax was the actual Corps.
Right.
And they would be the ones who would have to file an appeal, wouldn't it?
You would think so. And that was one of the arguments that Bob Rayner made on behalf of, I don't remember which parish it was, but in the second phases of Odebrecht and the Cajun contractors. Because what you would think is that the Corps should benefit from the refund, right? Because if they paid and the court said, nope. If you the contractor, you get the money back, you were the taxpayer, and the Corps just don't care,
We've seen the federal government take that position quite often.
Yeah, they literally, we were kind of surprised at that.
The pit owner is not out any monies. They remitted them based upon what was sold, and the
Sure.
amount was paid by the Corps.
That is correct.
So the only one who was harmed would be the public, federally.
I would agree with you. And the federal government didn't get the money back in the cases that I'm familiar with.
The only thing it does to us as the parish, by adding additional costs to the development of collecting sales tax, reduces the amount of total dollars that are available for levy protection.
Well, yeah, and there's another side to it as well, and I've seen this, unfortunately, is you get the money and you spend it. Not you, but the parish spends it, and they're spending what they collect, so they're not like able to budget just in the event that they don't have a refund account, just in case, somebody files a refund claim. So it really is a burden on local government when they get a big refund claim like that. So, and we are, we do have them all we have some in Plaquemine. Every parish is getting them, particularly the oil and gas field, because oil and gas industry's hurting, so they're looking for any way to, save some money, I guess. So.
You represent 4 or 5 other parishes on the tax and sales taxes, and this parish is crying for income, and as all of them are, additional sources of revenue and stuff like that. But if I could, Mr. Rousseau, since you invited him here, I could ask him questions. Is there anything that you're seeing out there that we can look for additional sources of revenue?
Well, the
not doing?
oil field is slowly coming back. You see the price back up to around $59, $60. So that's a good turn. One of the things that has recently happened is there was a case decided by the U.S. Supreme Court called Wayfair versus South Dakota. And that was an internet sales case. And so basically we used to be, it was this old North Dakota case that was decided in 1986 or 7 that was controlling. It said in order to have an out-of-state dealer collect your sales tax and remit it to you, they had to have a physical presence. I mean, they had to have like a store somewhere in Louisiana. Otherwise, they couldn't. So, of course, Louisiana was losing, and every state was losing a tremendous amount of sales tax on transactions that were being bought over the internet.
It changed last January.
It
changed last January.
Right. We have now what's called it's the Louisiana Remote Sellers Commission that was established. And so they are now collecting from remote sellers that sell over $100,000 worth of goods and supplies in Louisiana or have more than 200 transactions. They were looking for an attorney, threw my name in the hat, and they hired me. So I'm still trying to get my contract with them.
How are we seeing that we're collecting the money from them, of which they're collecting?
They automatically remit it, and I don't have a report. I can't tell you what Plaquemine is getting, but you asked for good news. You're now collecting money in this parish from a source that you weren't before. I don't know what the percentages or what the numbers are, but the commission is registering somewhere around 300 a month, 300 vendors a month that are now reporting. And there's an online portal where they can go online and, put in their information. There's geocodes for the sales, and it allocates the money to the parishes, and you get your check, and they charge you 1% for it.
You still can apply for exemptions and all that based upon the type of business you're doing.
Yeah, in fact, the portal is so easy, it's ridiculous.
I've been through it. I've done some stuff with the state with that. But the parish, being a bedroom community that we are, we've seen huge things across the state in taxes being collected.
Yeah.
I know the parish is doing it, though.
So it is something that you all are seeing, I think, and it'll only get bigger, I hope, and then, of course, we'll see there's a move for more state centralization in this legislative session.
The only reservation I have about that is that where we're collecting the sales tax from people that are buying off the internet, it's always hurt the local merchants, and where they start buying elsewhere, and whether or not we utilize those funds in the future to keep and retain those vendors and those merchants within our communities.
Right. The good news is that there are now, at least it's a level playing field. It wasn't before, because you could, there would be no purpose to go buy something at the corner store when you could get it the next day and not have any taxes, taken from the vendor. So that's been a positive change in sales tax collection, in my opinion. And again, the oil field hopefully will, because this is an oil-dependent parish, as is Lafourche, as is several of them that I represent. So,
Mr. Russo?
Well, Mr. Amity, I want to thank you very much for coming and attending to today and enlightening the board on many of the issues that you have enlightened us on. It clears up some of the misconceptions that are penetrating out there, and if there are other questions, I'm sure that they can reach out to you and ask you directly.
absolutely.
And as far as the sales tax goes, I think that if the board decides, or if the council decides even to take another look, they can ask the internal auditor.
Absolutely.
And that way, it'll follow along with your recommendations, as well as, not wasting any more public funds for chasing something that might or might not be there. But I want to thank you again for your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
No, you have to ask the chairman.
Anybody? Any more questions from the table? Audience? Please state your name and your address.
Hi, I'm Karen Boudry. I'm with Plaquemines Dirt and Clay. You want my personal address or the business?
Business, that's good.
At 105 Engineers Road, Belle Chase. Okay. I just want to clarify something from our company's standpoint. We've been hearing in the community a lot of information that we're not paying taxes, and it's kind of disconcerting. We're very aware of the Odebrecht case, and we have never invoked it to our advantage. And let me explain. It has always been the guidance to our company that the contractor who places the dirt on the levee must invoke that themselves in their contract with the Corps. So we have never not collected sales tax on behalf of Plaquemines Parish or the state invoking the Odebrecht rule or decision. It's always been our understanding that that's between the contractor and the Corps, and that those folks must do it within their own contract. So since the very beginning, 2008 with us, we've collected sales tax and paid Plaquemines Parish and the state. Since 2015, when some issues came about, when things were split up on invoices, we've paid the aggregate. So we've continued to pay our sales tax, and I'm the one that pays it every month. I'm the one that works with our CPAs. And so I do, if someone has a problem, I wish they'd point it out to me, because a lot of people are saying we don't pay our taxes, and it's just not true. So I wanted to clarify that as far as the Odebrecht, we're collecting that. And again, if contractors want to come back and say we shouldn't have, shouldn't have collected from them. Again, it is, as he mentioned, it's kind of on them to go back and ask for a refund, but everyone out there is pretty much aware of Odebrecht and probably would have invoked that by now. So just, excuse me, as a clarification, just wanted to let you all know where we stood with that.
Any questions from the tables?
Yeah.
Mr. Valley?
Why are you all paying sales tax even though you know about the Odebrecht case? Do you have an opinion or something that told you had to? Or somebody told you?
Yeah, we have an opinion that that's not necessarily our responsibility. It is the contractor's responsibility to invoke Odebrecht, not us. So there's obviously some fine print there that,
Somebody told you to collect.
yes,
Who?
our attorneys said, go ahead and collect it.
Should you hear?
And there may be some other, I'm a little fuzzy on exactly, because we're going back to 2015 when this came out, but it was advice to our company to go ahead and collect it.
One of the things that you've heard from Mr. Roussel from the very beginning when his committee was formed was that we have uniformity and consistency amongst all the dirt pit operators in how the parish does business with them. So I think somewhere along the lines, you all need to get together and find out whether they should be paying or still collecting or whatever the case might be.
Mr. Valley, I think that's out of the realm of what we should be talking about right now.
Okay?
Because that's going to be an issue. We're talking about, the process and so forth. If there's an individual litigation or pending litigation or claims that are in the court or in the tax commission or whatever, that's something that we don't want to discuss until it's resolved, in my opinion. And my issue is, I don't know who's telling you all of that, or where you hear those rumors, but if I went by every rumor that I heard about what I don't do and what I do, I would live a different life. But I can't address rumors and, whatever they talking about you, they talk about me or they talk about them. So if anybody at the board has said something about you, they'll have to answer for themselves. But my purpose today was to get Mr. Amity here to explain to the board the mechanics and what is exempt, what is not exempt, and whether or not we were going to pursue auditing borough pit operators for sales tax or not, based on what his opinion was, and because it had been suggested, and we're going to develop this concept and this theory as we go through this meeting as to why we're here. And I guess I'll just stop and you can see how this develops as we go through the next portion of the meeting.
I simply wanted to clarify because he made it sound like many of us weren't paying the tax, that's all.
Well, what I got out of him was he was very clear that they didn't have to pay the tax if it was going to a state or federal or local levy. That's what I got out of it. So, I'm going to leave it at that and we can move on.
Thanks.
Item 3.
Discuss borough pit ordinances.
Mr. Roussel?
Yes, thank you. Let me distribute these ordinances. There's a packet for each of you there. And what I did was over the last few weeks that we, from our very first meeting, and Mr. Amity, you don't feel obligated to stay, but if you'd like to learn something, we'll be glad to.
I'm always interested. I'll sit and listen.
But anyway,
Thank you.
to sum this up, to see where we're really at with this, it's quite confusing. I know you received a lot of documents. We received some from Woodland Borough Pit. We received some from the Sheriff's Office. We received a whole lot of documents. But to give you a brief history and to hone in on what we really need to address, in my opinion, was that you go back and you look at the very first case that was there. And, that was back in 1995 when the Plaquemines Parish government decided to sue Frankie Adolph or BNA Materials. And then Judge Kirby ruled that the ordinance 9331 that was in place was never advertised in the Gazette. Now, that I didn't realize that was the basis of all of this when we first started, but after reading all of the cases, I see that they occasionally go back and cite that. And so what happened prior to that, in 1992, that was the very first borrow pit moratorium that was put in place. And then they came back in 1993, and they issued the first ordinance that regulated borrow pits. And so then in 1995, they came back and they put some requirements in backfill. And the backfill issue has been the main issue on these borrow pits for many, many years about, whether they're going to backfill or not. Then in 2009, they amended it and they added a minimum cubic yard bonding requirement to the ordinance. And then in October 22nd, 2009, they came back and did some policies and procedures. And that was vetoed by the parish president at the time. He didn't like the procedures and so forth, evidently, for whatever reason. And the council decided to override his veto on November of 2009. And then in 2010, they did another moratorium, and then they extended the moratorium until the end of the year. And to make it short, they amended the pit ordinance in response to some litigation that happened with the Scarsdale Lands Company, and that gave us the 2010 ordinance, which was the first ordinance that had some guidance in it as far as the policies and procedures to try to overcome that litigation. And then in May of 2012, 2 years later, they issued another moratorium. And then in December 13th of 2012, they adopted the 1238 ordinance, which you have before you today that I just distributed, which is the ordinance that we are operating under today. Now, that ordinance is where it's my understanding that the attorneys for the pit operators, the parish attorneys all got together in the room or wherever, and through emails or whatever, and came to a consensus on an ordinance that we were going to operate under. And the language in that ordinance was very clear that if you were utilizing the material in the parish for local levies, state levies, federal levies, that you would not have to backfill the borrow pit. And everybody seemed to live with that. And if you look at that ordinance, and it's quite extensive, you'll see why they did that. And then moving right along, evidently they had some issues in October the 13th, in 2013, some council members decided they wanted to try to put another moratorium in place, and that effort by the council failed. So that moratorium never did go into being. Then in October the 13th, a resolution to settle litigation. There was a bunch of agreements over the years and settlement agreements. And if you look at Resolution 13-343, it's to settle litigation. Originally with Citrus Lands, which Woodland Borough Pits bought Citrus Lands out, and they assumed the claims that were in that case, and they wound up getting a settlement in 2013. So after this case was settled, the council moved forward and they adopted Resolution 14-123, which was seeking qualified persons and firms to enforce the ordinance. And then they went ahead and they had some more litigation come forward in June of 2014, where Parish was sued again on 2 different cases for not issuing permits. So at the end of the day, we keep going through the ordinance, the suits, the ordinance, the suits, and settlement agreements all along the way to where we are at September 25th, 2014. You look at that, it authorizes professional engineers and lawyers to enforce the ordinance. So they went ahead and you look at the ordinance on that ordinance 14-177, you'll see there where it says that it is a consensus of the parish council that all sums collected by the parish government through the administrative fees set forth in section 18-92 be earmarked for the hiring of the professionals. So after they asked for the professionals, they implemented this ordinance to say that all of those fees are to pay for those professionals. And they went ahead and they hired a professional and they hired lawyers, and they went through a process of, looking at the borough pits, and they wound up coming back with some recommendations, fencing here, which was kind of minor in my opinion, but it was part of the process, and those recommendations were forwarded along. And to fast forward, you go to the next ordinance. If you look at ordinance number 1566, okay, this is an ordinance that says it was mandating that the parish president, because they got tired of paying the outside lawyers the fees to implement the ordinance. And in ordinance 15-66, the ordinance is mandating the parish president to assign a member of the legal department to replace the outside counsel law firm to enforce the ordinance. So if you look at the ordinance prior to that, you have the mechanism to use the fees that are collected, and you have the mechanism to use an in-house attorney to enforce the ordinance. So moving a little further along, if you look at another ordinance, ordinance number 15-108, it amended ordinance 12-238. This is where they put teeth in the ordinance that said that whenever there was credible evidence of a violation of any of the provisions of Chapter 18 of the Code of Ordinances, it is the intention of the parish council that the parish president or his designee shall commence any and all appropriate enforcement actions to ensure compliance. So there's been a history here of trying to enforce this ordinance, whether it's outside attorneys, now inside attorneys. And to tell you where we are today, in the last meeting that I had with the administration, and the last meeting that we had the attorney here from the administration, I made the comment that he didn't want to be here. And I can tell you as of today, he's not going to be here. He's not here because he's in a court case today. Okay, he has a reason supposedly for that. But the parish president has asked me to revoke the ordinance that mandates that he provide an attorney to enforce the ordinance. He refuses to appoint an attorney. So if we're going to move forward with any enforcement of this ordinance, I would suggest that and I've asked the president again to give us an accounting of the fees that are being collected, to utilize those fees and assign that to someone else under the control of the council to enforce the council ordinance if the parish president refuses, which he has refused to me, to carry out the ordinances. So that's as brief as I can make it without going through every single resolution and ordinance. And it's a brief history of where we are and how we got here. But as you can see, it's very convoluted. And I haven't even addressed the issue of why we would need an attorney to enforce the ordinance. Because I believe that all of these settlement agreements, which we have several of, are requirements that have to be checked out, possibly litigated if it comes to that. But there are settlement agreements that said that the parish would do this and the operator would do this. Now, there are some conflicting dates in the correspondence about who's doing what and if they were going to continue to honor that agreement. And without getting into it and trying to litigate it at this table, I think we need some legal counsel to look at those settlement agreements to be able to make sure that they have been carried out on both sides of the equation, the parish's side and the operator's side. And having said all of that, I mean, I got to the point where I was nauseated reading all of these documents over and over, these agreements and these amended agreements, and then the next agreement and another agreement. You kept on. So to tell you that we have an ordinance in place that makes any sense, it only makes sense to somebody who's going to come in and start a whole new pit. Because the existing pits are all operating under some agreement. So having said that, it's my intention to pursue the administration to provide us with a revenue number, and then if it's the committee's wishes and the council's wishes to move forward with trying to put this in perspective, I think that's what we should do. The other thing is, you know, we've had an effort to try to find out what pits are actually operating in the parish today. And I'm going to distribute this list, and according to our public records, there are 5 actual pits in operation currently under the public records that are active. The rest of these, according to our departments, are not active. So if we go forward, as you know, I mean, in my opinion, we've already exhausted the sales tax issue. As far as outside, I'm starting to repeat myself again, we can look at the internal auditor to take a look, just to check. But I'll open the floor to discussion to see if you have any comments, because what we have to do, in my opinion, is we have to get back to an ordinance. And if it's 12-238, and utilize that for everybody across the board to be able to have a fair playing field with all operators, then that's what we need to do. There were some agreements that were entered into that don't even have council approval. And I don't know how that happened, but it surely shouldn't have happened to the degree it happened, because I was always under the opinion that if you had litigation or you had the threat of litigation, you at least needed a council authority to be able to settle that issue. And in some cases, it hasn't happened. So without belaboring my points, I'd like to see if we can get some discussion from the board to see where the direction's going to go.
Mr. Vallon?
Benny, I can't disagree with anything you said. It's mind-boggling with all the different agreements that are here and the settlements and transactions to know what everybody's operating under. You have to actually separate each one as to the initial ordinance that you talked about, 12-238, and then take alongside of that the settlement agreements. And then you have the arguments from various people that everybody wants equality, everybody wants it to be equal to what everybody else is getting, et cetera. And it gets back to the litigation, what the council has or has not done in the past. I would agree with you in that the administration, the meeting that we all had over there discussing in general with the lawyer, is that the administration does not have the manpower or the wherewithal right now financially to support legal counsel and auditing, et cetera.
Wait, one second, Mr. Valley.
Go ahead.
I didn't say they didn't have the manpower or the capability. I said, I know they're more than capable attorneys to be able to handle this issue. It's whether or not they want to or not. And it's my opinion that they do not want to handle this. The comments to me is that we don't want to chase nickels, you know. And this is more than an issue about chasing nickels. This is about upholding the parish ordinance or not upholding the parish ordinance. And if it's the case that, you know, the administration doesn't want to enforce the council ordinance, which is their responsibility under the charter, very clearly that they ought to enforce and uphold the parish charter and the policies created by this government. Just as the ordinances that I cited, they are directly tasked with those things that are implicit. So,
irrespective of what transpired,
no,
they don't want to do it. And it's
that's my opinion. I don't want to discredit them.
End result, they don't want to do it.
That's my opinion.
Okay, I agree with that totally. I think, you know, how about you were there? The thing about it is we need to find a means for this committee to recommend to the council to take the role on itself. And you said you're going to ask for the fees and the monies to pay for that. I think the auditing, again, your idea about using the internal auditor from time to time in that committee that you chair was a perfect idea to move forward with that being part of it. And if you got to amend the ordinance to do so, I would support what, you know, suggestions in that regard. As far as the pits, I'm like you, there's only about 6 people really operating. We have 3 contracts out right now that the Corps is doing, and we need to see the continuation of those and where they're coming from. You're getting ready to this today, I think, or you did already, the lift that's being done at Jesuit Bend is another that's going to need dirt and fill for that. So all of it boils down to we got to have consistency moving forward with what you've discussed as far as the agreements. I think there's 1 or 2 terms that are expiring right now. I think Mr. Hogan was here last meeting and discussed they have a pending application they want to put in. I think from this point forward, the committee and the council need to be very clear on what rules are going to be in place to entertain any new application that's there. And then the enforcement side of this issue goes back to whatever attorney you bring into it that recommends to the council to proceed against it, if so. I'm like you. There's been too much rollover, too many negotiations, completely different from each other, and there's no consistency amongst all the settlement agreements. And it's only fair for the operators out there. We're going to need dirt now, and we're going to need dirt in the future. So we have to be consistent what we do on a long-term basis. That's all I got to say right now for the time being.
Mr. Bartholomew?
During the first 4 years, when we came on for the second term, that was one of the main tasks that we had organized to develop through a borough pit committee. And we sat down there a number of times, we met several times, and the concern was to get something that everybody can follow as far as the borough pits are concerned, the ordinance. And the administration did not follow up with the task through the legal department. So there was no reason for a committee to meet without them being involved in the process and trying to alleviate and coming to an end to where all of the borough pit owners could have something generic that everybody can follow. And everything was been straight up and to the point. But they decided not to get involved, and that's what happened. Just like Mr. Roussel said, they didn't want to be bothered. And that's why we are still here today with all the discrepancies that's existing. So the bottom line is either we got to give the president directive from the legal department to move forward, or we go out and hire an attorney to do it as a council. That's the only two choices we have. Or else we're going to be just status quo. That's all, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Roussel?
No, well, I was just going to refer to the ordinance that's already in books. We've already given direction to the parish president. Well, we didn't. This was the previous government, before we ever got here, that they passed this ordinance, taking the responsibility away from the outside council and giving it to the parish president to appoint an attorney as per the ordinance that I distributed to you just a minute ago. So we have gone full circle to where, we're back to who we're going to use because the parish president is not going to fulfill this role. I mean, that's what he told me. So anyway, that's all I have to say.
Wilcox?
Mr. Russo, I got a copy of the parish budget, and you mentioned that the ordinance does allow for these attorneys and other people that would need to do this enforcement to be paid for out of the fees collected. And from what I'm reading, looking at the budget, there seems to be plenty of money. I don't think finances are a holdup, so I tend to agree with you. If that money that's being collected according to our own parish budget has indeed been collected, then there should be plenty of money to allow for the internal auditor, an attorney, anybody you need to do this work.
Well, the parish president has assured me that he will gather that number and present it to me. I'm still waiting on the number, but I mean, you pull a budget, you can look at it. I'm just curious to see if he's going to give me the number and what the number is going to be. And look, the internal auditor is on the payroll already. If we decide that that's one, we want him to take a look, he's going to get paid to do that, or he's going to get paid to do something else. But it's not going to be an added cost. And if we decide that we need some, and the parish president continues his position that we need some legal counsel, the council already has an attorney on board, Mr. Garrett. I think that we could assign him to that duty, and he can review some of these agreements. I'm not talking about going outside and getting a law firm that's going to eat our lunch. So I think that we can do this with a reasonable amount of funds, very efficiently, and still serve the purpose of what we're trying to do, if we can get the consensus of everyone to do that. And as I said this, the very first meeting here, this committee is only going to be as successful as the cooperation that we get. And as you can see, the cooperation is lacking in some instances. So I'm hoping that we can make some progress on this. As Mr. Bartholomew said, he led this charge 4 years and got no cooperation. So here we are again, trying to get back on track. And I'm hoping that when I leave office in a year and 10 months, that we've made some progress. That's all I had.
Mr. Valley?
What do you need from us in this committee?
Well, at this point, I guess if you want to pass something to request the administration do something or the internal auditor do something, we can discuss that. That's where, the recommendation from this Borough Pit Committee can go to the full council or to the audit committee. And, that's a direction that we can take.
I would think that this committee could recommend to the full council to utilize the resources that we have available to us now, and to utilize Mr. Garrett, utilize your audit committee, assuming you can tell us that he has time and efforts to handle this stuff, and move forward in that direction, take the first steps and move on. If the rest of you all are in line with that.
Are you doing this in a form as a motion?
I will. If you all agreeable to it.
Anybody want to second him? We have a motion on the floor by Mr. Valley, second by Mr. Konovich. Any question from the table? Audience? Machines are open. And the measure passes 6-0. Is there any more discussion from the table? Any discussion from the table? Audience? We'll move for a motion to.
Paul Hogan, once again representing Woodland Bar Pits. Our reason for attendance is strictly because we have a resolution in front of y'all at the council level for the issuance of the North Pit Borough permit. And whatever can be done to get the committee to allow the council to issue that permit is what we want to try to help get done. The whole problem with your bar pit ordinance has been just what Mr. Russell has been saying. It's been enforcement. When the parish didn't enforce the ordinance, where a bar pit operator hauled dirt outside the parish, that caused a lawsuit, which the result was that borough pit got preferential treatment to continue to haul dirt outside the parish and sell to others and sell not to levy projects. So when that happened, that's where the settlement agreement, the second settlement agreement that we got, gave us the same thing that pit got, so that we were on a level playing field. As Mr. Roussel said, the playing field needs to be fair for all operators. And we're in complete agreement. The first settlement agreement that we got came because when we applied for the bar pit permit in 2013 or 14, the council denied the permit, namely because of Ironton and some other issues. There was public outcry. So we said there was no justifiable reason to deny our permit, so we went to court. And then the settlement agreement came in, and what it did, it says, we'll issue you the permit, but we're going to put restrictions on you. You can't dig no more than 17 million cubic yards. You can't apply for a landfill. And you can't have any other pits in the general area. So what that settlement agreement did was put restrictions on us. If y'all want to take those restrictions away and let that settlement go away, we have no problems with that. But we cannot let the second settlement agreement go away, because that kept and put us on an even playing field with another bar pit operator. As Mr. Roussel said, we have to have a playing field that's equal. So the net effect is we're operating under the bar pit ordinance, period, except for the restrictions that y'all put on us above and beyond the restrictions that are already in the ordinance, and the second settlement agreement that gives us a fair, even playing field with another bar pit. So we're not asking for anything that's, crazy out of the ordinary. All we want is fairness and a bar pit permit. So anything that can be done to, to get our permit in front of the council, approved and issued, we're here to help. And thank you for your time.
Mr. Roussel?
Mr. Hogan, the settlement agreement that you're referring to is the one that, one of them I read that raised some issues with me, is that there was a settlement agreement that gave you 35.45 acres closer to the highway where you could dig, and it changes the offset requirements. And in exchange for that, it said that y'all were going to donate 98 acres that were impacted by the levee project. Then there was a letter that I found that was dated prior to the ordinance that was signed by Ms. Phyllis, saying that she took the offer off the table. Now, I don't know why the ordinance was passed after the date of the letter, but my question to you is that, did your company ever donate the servitude for the 98 acres for the levee? Because I know you're already digging in the part of the agreement that you said you could agree, but did you do the other part of the agreement?
The first point I want to make regards to that is that pertains to the south Borough Pit, not the north Borough Pit that I'm currently talking about. But the answer is yes. The area that was that was supposed to be donated has been donated to the parish. That's all in y'all public records. You already have that. There was nothing that was backed out of that agreement. I'm not sure where you got that information from.
No, I got it out of the settlement agreement. My question is to you, was it done?
Absolutely. It's recorded in the parish courthouse.
Provide us that copy of that donation?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
So this is not I got you thing. This is an educational thing for me.
Oh, yeah. Look,
unwind this puzzle. And as I unwind it, questions arise. Yeah. And that's why I asked that question. It has nothing to do with your North Borough Pit permit. Mm-hmm. We're talking about the agreements that are in place, because there are many of them, that are amended and so forth.
Yeah.
And then when you talk about, y'all agreed that y'all weren't going to do any more digging in the 3,500 acres, it says in the agreement. Not just in one area, but in the whole 3,500 acres. You weren't going to apply for any more permits.
I'd have to read it to see, but I think it was in the
agreement.
Area.
It's in the settlement agreement.
Like I said, I'd have to look at it to see.
Look, I'm so tired of looking at it for the last 2 weeks that, that's what raises these questions.
Yeah. But no, everything that was agreed to in the settlement agreements, we have complied with completely. And I'll send you the documents showing you the donation of the acreage. I think it was like 70 acres or something that we.
Well, it said in here that it was going to be 95 in the agreement.
Yeah, but I think that was what it was initially. But when the Corps actually came and did the exact footprint that they needed, it was adjusted to the exact footprint that the Corps required.
The other thing that threw me off was that some of the documents that you sent us, they were on the back side, they were copied. And when I read the front side of the document, the back side of the document was not the back side that goes with the document. And so I'm looking for ordinances and resolutions according to the back side of the document that don't reflect the front side. So that took me a little while to unwind.
Yeah,
I'll quit belaboring the point, but.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly, but if there's any documents that are not clear, if you could just show me after the meeting, and
what I did was I searched the government records, and I wound up getting the correct documents, but I wanted to give you the benefit of reviewing your documents, which I did, and then I had to go back and make these two ladies go through the files over and over and over again to get to what I distributed today.
Gotcha, but you got it now. Everything's good.
Well, yeah, except a couple of things that, asking for.
So like I said, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get you the donation document and the recordation information showing that all of that was done as per the agreement with the South Pit.
And just to follow up on that, it seems like you're willing to do different things, but the most important thing, if you heard in my comments earlier in this meeting, were that the backfill ordinance selling outside of the parish was critical to the integrity of the ordinance. And that's the sticking point that we all have. And that's what you say you have a sticking point with.
Yeah, like I said, we comply with that ordinance, and we made sure that we did not sell outside the parish because we didn't want to have that issue of somebody coming telling us now we got to backfill.
Right.
But the parish allowed another bar pit to haul outside of the parish. That was the problem, was lack of enforcement.
I know, I understand that, but let me tell you what the problems that I have. First of all, that agreement was made by the previous administration, and then the agreement that was made with your company was never approved by the board under a threat of litigation. And so that is the legal issue that I have qualms with, because the attorney, the parish president, in my opinion, didn't have authority to sign that agreement without a board approval. But,
I don't know that.
well, that's my position. I'm just explaining to you why I see that as an issue. And as far as the other pit that sold outside of the parish, I don't know what to say about that one, except that it, should have never been done.
So
I yield, because we have another council meeting, a port meeting starting.
Gotcha. So I'll just end with what do we need to do in order to be able
There
to?
was other agreements, because agreement was y'all was going to backfill pits in Narren. Then another agreement to it was, well, y'all will fill it if y'all get to sell sand out the pit. And that permit wasn't honored. The parish didn't give you a permit to sell sand, so y'all just didn't fill anything.
Once again, that wasn't Woodland Bar Pits, that was White Oak. That's a separate
That's the
entity
same
from us.
property we talking about. though.
Terry White owned that property independently, separate and apart from Woodland Bar Pits. So,
But we talking about the Woodland Borough Pit North, across from Arlington.
mhm.
On the first, y'all was supposed to backfill. Then they said, well, we won't backfill that one, we'll backfill the two in Narren.
No. The Woodland North Bar Pit is a virgin bar pit that was created under the Bar Pit Ordinance. There's never been any issue about backfilling unless we would sell outside the parish or to a non-core project, then you have to backfill. There's nothing in those settlement agreements about anything to do with backfilling at the North Bar Pit, other than the second agreement, which put us on equal field with Myrtle Grove, that the parish settled and said, y'all can sell outside the parish, y'all can sell to anybody y'all want, as long as you pay the 5 cents cubic yard fee and you don't have to backfill.
But those two pits in Narren have nothing to do with Woodland Borough.
Nothing to do with Woodland Bar Pits whatsoever.
I gotta look at another map then.
Yeah. So anyway, my bottom line is, where do we need to go in order to get to where we can get our
Well, this is the
permit?
thing, we have to make a decision as a council whether or not we're going to put a moratorium in place to try to get back to scratch. Because if we can't settle the issues, then we go to a moratorium, and we'll have the legal department find legal ways to get back to where we need to be with the original ordinance that we're trying to enforce. That's my opinion only.
Well,
Mr. Valley?
Paul, the property that you were talking about with Benny, about you're supposed to donate to the parish, the 95 acres,
Yes.
you never really donated. Didn't you all swap another piece of property for that piece?
No, it's actually a levy servitude. We granted the parish the levy servitude at no cost in exchange for us being able to excavate within a certain area by one of our pits.
Instead of 1,000 feet, you moved up to 500 feet to the road.
That's right, it was something like that. Yeah, like 1,000-foot setback and reduced it
What the
to,
ordinance called for it, but then you moved up to 500.
yeah, whatever it was in that agreement.
And why did they allow you to do that? To deviate from the 1,000 feet?
To compensate for the back section that he was giving up.
Yeah, it was look, we'll give, it was just an agreement between the parish, look, you give us that land for free, we'll allow you to do that over there.
They were going to take it anyway for the levy.
Huh?
It wasn't about
Yeah, but it would have cost the parish, this way they got it for free.
They got expropriated for the surface value only, not the dirt value.
Right, and that's what they did. This is strictly for the surface value.
Right, but there's other litigation that we shouldn't be talking about because there's other values there that we're being sued for right now.
Yeah, which has nothing to do with this issue. Yeah.
It's
Do you
all
have
related.
any litigation against the parish right now, Penny?
Woodland Bar Pits does, it's regard to valuation.
And you're asking for a permit for this?
Yeah, but like I said, it has nothing to do with bar pit permit.
That's all.
All right, thank y'all.
Any more comments from the audience?
Motion to adjourn.
We have a motion by Mr. Conovich to adjourn,
Second.
seconded by Mr. Valley. No, This not you, not yet, sweetheart. This is not the council meeting.
You have something to say about borough pits?
This is
You have
about
something-
borough pits.
Okay, that's.
No, that's something different, sweetheart. Thank you. That's something different, baby.
Is it, you want to do rezone for a borough pit?
We have a motion to adjourn, seconded. Any question from the table? Audience? Machines are open. And the measure passes 4-0.
At which
Actually,
time?
it should be 5-0. Mr. Wilcox, are you voting to adjourn?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, 5-0. We have adjournment of the Borough Pit Advisory Committee at 2:43 p.m.